Good morning or afternoon or evening. Um, I'm Erik Hempel, and I want to tell you a little bit, give you a few thoughts about what it takes to develop a successful aquaculture industry. I was, uh, we hear every day that aquaculture is the answer to future seafood production. It will increase in production, but where? What species? What does it take to develop an aquaculture industry? I decided to focus on three different countries or regions. A successful one, which was Norway, a failure, which is the European Union, one that's just starting, that's Australia. And for the purpose of this podcast, I decided to look at the US and Canada also. Now, I decided to use just a few characteristics of these countries. For instance, species. Which species and how many species are they focusing on? What are the natural conditions and geographical differences between the regions? What about legislation and regulatory framework? Is it well developed? Are there any special interest groups? What technologies are they using? But first, let's take a look at how they have developed so far. You will see that these regions or countries have developed quite differently. Take the red line, that is Norway. You see, nothing much happened until the 1980s, but then it took off, and it's been a steep growth curve. Today, Norway is producing more than 1.6 million tons per year. The orange line is the European Union. Good growth until about the turn of the century, then stagnation and decline. The white line is the United States. Some growth until about the mid-20s, then decline and stagnation. The pink line is Canada. They had some growth until the mid-20s. Since then, it's been pretty much stagnated. Australia, the green line, is still in early days, and there's slow but steady growth. Now, when it comes to species, there are a number of considerations that you have to take into account. Biology, is the species suited to the climate and environment? Are they herbivores or carnivores? This has to do with the feed availability. And not least, market. Is there a market already, or must it be developed? Availability of the fish from the wild, is it seasonal, geographically limited? And what about the price level? Would it be profitable to produce it in aquaculture? Now, number of species cultured, I found some great differences. You will see that the EU produces 401 different species. This is according to FAO statistics. Australia, 39. Norway, only 16. The US, 41. And Canada, only 19. If we look at the top species and its share of the total production, you will see that the EU has a widespread since the top species, which is sea mussels, only accounts for 17% of the total. Australia, salmon, 65%. The US, channel catfish, 31%. Canada, salmon again, 65%. And Norway, salmon, 94%. In other words, the salmon-producing countries have focused and are concentrating on that one species mainly. Now, the EU set up a project called Diversify in 2013, and they were looking at new species, and they picked out a number of them that you see listed here: meager, greater amberjack, redfish, Atlantic halibut, gray mullet, and pike perch. I took a look at what the global farm production of these species was in 2022 and at how much Europe produced of this. And as you see, it's not really a success. The highest number is for pike perch with almost 7,000 tons. But 7,000 tons is nothing. Now, there are a number of other species that you could concentrate on, like tuna, yellowtail, cobia, sablefish, lobster, crab, cleaner fish, that is, fish that's used to clean salmon from salmon lice. And then, of course, don't forget seaweed. There is a need to produce feed. What we need for feed depends on the species, of course. If it's a carnivore, you need small pelagic fish or fish waste from processing. You can also use microalgae. And lately, insects are becoming quite uh, interesting. But of course, there's also uh, plant material that's being used. Soybean is the most used. Well, there are vast geographical areas, differences between these areas. To the right here, you have a picture from Norway um, with the northern lights, cold waters, very few species, and then the picture to the left is Vietnam, warm waters, lots of different species. In Norway, we only have the cold water. In Europe, they have cold and temperate waters. In Australia, they have all three, cold water, temperate, and tropical waters. In the US, it's cold and temperate, mostly temperate. And in Canada, cold water. Natural conditions. What you see here are the natural conditions from Norway, where you see islands and fjords and inlets protecting the floating cages. That is not necessarily the case in a lot of other areas where you might not have a coast full of islands or inlets. This is one of the reasons why uh, salmon farming in Norway has been such a success. Now, more and more we're hearing about land-based recirculation aquaculture systems, RAS technology. This is becoming popular now because it can be set up close to the market, thus reducing transport costs, but it is relatively expensive to invest in this. And so far, it hasn't really been a great success. They're working on it, though. Now let's look at the legal and regulatory framework, where I found great differences. Uh, in the EU, I found that the legislation was not really properly developed, but it is being improved. Main issues there seem to be environment, competition, social acceptance, and the authorities are particularly interested in controlling the industry. In Australia, regulations differ from state to state. In one state, a species may be banned, in another, it may be encouraged. Issues there are local potential, biological potential, and the environment, of course. The situation in Australia is characterized by confusion. In Norway, there is one set for the whole country, one set of regulatory framework. It is frequently being updated and adjusted as the needs arise. Issues there are ownership, environment, and disease fighting. The key word for Norwegian regulatory framework is it's an enabling framework. In the US and Canada, there I also found some differences. In the US, the regulatory framework is not properly developed, but it is improving. There's strong opposition from fisheries sector and from environmental groups. So the issues are environment, special interest groups, and there's a problem with social acceptance. I chose to say that the US aquaculture industry is characterized by lobbying. In Canada, the legislation needs updating. It's not proper. The issues are that the potential is not exploited. There's biological confusion, and the environment is very much in the center of attention. And I've chose to call the situation confusion there too. Now, I must say a few words about the role of the government, what the government should do, and perhaps what it shouldn't do. The government should create an enabling environment for the industry. It should provide the regulatory framework. It should provide the infrastructure like roads and electricity, etc. It should do basic research, and it should provide training and extension services, basic training and extension. What the government should not do is get involved in the business of aquaculture. Now, technologies, there are a number of them. Here you see pond culture, rope culture, land-based culture, tank, indoor tank culture, and you see floating cage culture. It all depends on the species and what is available to you. In the European Union, rope culture for mussels and dams for various fresh fish are used, as well as floating cages for some salmon, but very little. In Norway, they're using floating cages, and now, of course, offshore, huge installations way out to sea are being used, and they're looking at land-based. In Australia, they're using floating cages, rope culture for oysters and shells, and dam culture for shrimp. In the US, they're using dam culture for catfish, rope culture for oysters, and land-based RAS systems for salmon. Canada using floating cages for salmon and rope culture for oysters. Now, there is one thing that I noticed that I think may play a part in developing the industry, and that is the attitude of the investors. Are they investing their profits in improvements, or are they focusing on taking out dividends? I found differences in Europe, for instance, between the Norwegians and the Mediterranean investors. Norwegians have been plowing money back into development and improvements. In the Mediterranean, they've been more focused on taking out dividends, and consequently, there is less development, less improvement in that region. So I think that the attitude of the investor is very important. You have to have a long-term goal for your investments, and you shouldn't really expect quick returns. Now, what does it take to create an industry then? Well, I pointed out a legal and regulatory framework is absolutely crucial. You need surveillance and enforcement of the law. You need research and development, basic research by the state, applied research by the companies, the private sector. Scientific information as the basis for management decisions is extremely important. You need international cooperation, efficient operation of the fish farms, and full utilization of the raw material, the biomass. You need education at all levels, and not least, you need to focus on the market and marketing efforts. Without the market, you can drop all the others. Now, I've been asked by the uh, organizers of this podcast uh, a couple of questions on on what the North Fishing Foundation is doing regarding promoting sustainable practices, what the industry challenges are, and our future vision of the industry. And I must say that the North Fishing Foundation is a foundation that was set up back in, well, it was set up in the 90s, but it's been operating without having the foundation legal basis since 1960. It was set up with one purpose, to organize a technology exhibition for fisheries. Later in 79, it added aquaculture technology, and the foundation is organizing these two exhibitions, the North Fishing exhibition for fisheries technology and the Aquanor exhibition for aquaculture technology. That's the only purpose of this foundation. However, we have gotten involved in promoting sustainable practices. And the way we do that is that in 2003, we established our Innovation Award. It is given to innovative technology or procedures introduced to the industry that will promote sustainable aquaculture, as well as improve the performance of the aquaculture. This has been very successful, and we're getting applicants for this award from all over the world now. Now, with regard to industry challenges and advocacy, uh, that is the foundation, only play an indirect role um, in promoting aquaculture. Um, we offer a platform for companies, organizations, and authorities to present their innovations and to talk about it. That's why we have a fairly wide professional program, starting with a full day conference the day before the actual exhibition opens. And we do this in cooperation with academia, with the universities in Trondheim, and with the Food and Agriculture Organization of the UN. With regard to our future vision and impact, we believe that aquaculture will take over as the main source of seafood production. We also believe that the production will have to be focusing on sustainability, including environmental considerations, of course. If we don't take care of the environment, we just saw off the branch that we're sitting on. And we really believe, and that's why we have this cooperation with the universities, with academia, with FAO. We believe that all future technology will have to be based on science. And with that, I thank you for your attention.